G'day. Why do F1 tickets cost so much? Where does all that money go? Well, you're seconds away from finding out. A seat here for all 3 days of the Miami Grand Prix, $1,600. A concrete square in the Mexico City Stadium, $700, or $1,450 for a view of the start in Singapore. All those prices in US dollars. But before you get on your high horse about what these promoters are charging, let's have a look at some of the major costs that they face. First up, there's a license fee for every race to Formula One. Now that could range anywhere from 20 to 60 plus million dollars. Let's say Bahrain pays $52 million for their race, and they only get 100,000 spectators through the gate. So straight up, that's $520 per head just for the hosting fee. I've spoken to a couple of promoters in the process of putting this video together, and I have some cost estimates that will floor you. Let's start with insurance. Public liability, $700K. If you're running an air show, you'll require aviation insurance. And F1 have even asked promoters to secure active assailant insurance. What's that? Well, that's to cover incidents like this one back in Las Vegas in 2017. Then you've got security and event staff, and there are a heck of a lot of them, probably between 1,500 and 2,000 people per event. And that includes the people who obviously wear those big Ask Us signs in Vegas, which is a great idea. So put down $2 million for that. On top of that, you'll need a whole lot of other staff, and it could range anywhere in numbers from 5,000 to 10,000 each day. Of course, you're going to need 1,500 catering staff to look after those people, and you're going to need another 1,000 marshals. And when you feed all those people, you're probably looking at a bill of around $500,000 per event. What about the police? They provide their services for free, don't they? No. And neither do the traffic authorities, the statutory authorities, the ambulance people, the people that close down the freeway exits in certain cities. In fact, I know from talking to one of the policemen in Miami that the organizer was being charged at least $100 an hour for their time. So for all of those people, the promoter's probably spending, say, $1.5 million. What about these big screens? Some races will need 50 plus. Obviously, some countries demand more than others. For instance, Monza and Hungary have very few. But to be honest, if you haven't got access to a screen, often you have no idea what's going on in a race. So expect to see more of those. And that's going to probably set the promoter back $400,000. Oh, and one thing, my F1 photo books are available now at kimellman.com. This is the mini coffee table book, Best of 2024. And this is the 100-page, 4-kilogram special edition of it. And you can select from 4 different covers. Or if they're out of your budget, 2025 wall calendar with my best picks from 2024. What about grandstands? Yes, tracks like Australia, Singapore, Canada, Kota and Las Vegas have to build a number of stands, and they'll budget anywhere from $60 to $100 per seat. And the higher the stand, the more it costs to erect. Some of those at the Circuit of Americas are in the order of 30 rows high, and that becomes quite expensive. And then if you want to cover the backs of those stands with cloth, it might cost another $100,000 because you're going to need cranes, cherry pickers, scaffolds, workers. Some tracks, to save money, just leave them uncovered. Signage, yeah, there is a lot of signage involved for the promoter. F1 obviously does trackside signage, but they're responsible for everything around the track. And to save money, often circuits will use the signs that they've used last year again the following year, but they can't if they have the name of the event or the year on them. So where they can, they'll avoid putting up signage that needs to be changed the next year. Budget-wise for that, let's put down $600K, that's around the mark. These hospitality suites like Melbourne, Suzuka and others have to be purpose-built. That comes at a cost. On top of that, there might be media centres that need to be erected for one-off events. That was the case with Australia and Canada. For the first few years that I shot the sport, there'll be things like portable toilets around the track, and there'll be a whole host of other tents and buildings that need to be erected just for those 4 days of the event. Put that down as, say, $3 million. Now, I mentioned marshals earlier. They don't get paid, but they do get lunch and accommodation. Now, a promoter will have to pay the local motoring organisation to get those marshals in Australia. It's a mob called CAMS. And on top of that, CAMS will have paid management and a whole lot of extra fees that the association gets. And in places like Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, where they had very few marshals when they started their event, they had to fly marshals in from overseas. And I spoke to a number of marshals at those races from Australia, Great Britain and the US. So there's a big cost involved for that. Let's put that down as $750,000. Here's one of the bizarre fees. FIA charge each promoter a fee to appear on their calendar. What's that going to be? A few $1,000s? No, around $300K. And if you say, no, don't worry, we don't need to be on your calendar, we're going to do our own promotion, it's too bad. You just have to pay that fee. What about those shuttles that take all the corporate guests from the city out to the track, in particular Kota, other tracks as well? Yep, put that down for $500,000. Services, water, sewerage, electricity, communications, Wi-Fi, all that needs to go into most tracks. Even purpose-built circuits like Silverstone aren't set up to handle a crowd of 480,000 over 4 days, and all of this has to be brought in and laid over the top of the existing services and facilities. And yes, three-phase power is going to need to be run all around the circuit. You're going to need high-speed internet, and that's going to become more and more important. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if F1 eventually said you have to have this minimum level of internet. So put that down for $3 to $5 million. Now, as you can see here, these costs are ratcheting up big time on top of that hosting fee. And in most instances, you, the fan, are going to have to pay for that. Then there's marketing and sales, billboards at the airport and on major roads, print advertising, TV advertising, internet promotion. That could be costing anywhere up to $4 million. Now, sometimes the respective tourism authorities pay for that advertising, and I'll get to that a little bit later about what's in it for the cities and the countries hosting these events. What about public transport? You can't just hold an event and not tell the public transport people what you're going to need. And if you're going to say, look, we've got 100,000 people coming out at 5 p.m. tonight, they are going to have to redo a lot of their schedules, reroute public transport, and there's going to be a cost to the promoter for that. Here's another one that might surprise you. The promoter will have to stump up the cost of getting the freight from an airport to the track. Now, teams may have 700 tons of equipment. That could run into several $100,000 of costs. Once again, the promoter is having to pay that on top of their own costs to run their business. They'll have offices, costs, staff for the previous year. That's likely to be between $2 and $6 million. See these concrete barriers and these wire catch fences? They have to be stored somewhere after the event. And it could take 50,000 square meters of area to hold all this stuff. In Monaco, for instance, the organizer has to rent space outside of the principality to house all of the refrigerated trucks. So when the catering guys from McLaren or Ferrari need some more lettuce, somebody has to go for a drive outside the principality and bring it back. But getting back to those barriers and fences, there'll need to be trucks taking them to and from, staff organising that. There'll be rental of a storage yard somewhere, and that's probably going to run $500,000. These overpasses don't just appear at many of the tracks. They need to be built, and you can probably budget a couple of $1 million for that. Then they have to be lifted in, set up, and then lifted out afterwards. And remember, a lot of them require elevators, because obviously you have to get gear up, and also people in wheelchairs and the like. So budget $600,000 for that. Oh, and then a little bit of damage for the one that was hit in Baku, going back after Williams had an incident with their car and it had to be trailered off the circuit, and the top of the crane hit one of those bridges. Given that you've got people there for a whole day, they need to be entertained, and so you're going to have to budget for F1 TV, GP TV, track audio, speakers, presenters, someone to run the show, $400,000 to $1 million. And on the subject of concerts, some events, and Bahrain is one of them, Australia, Kota, I believe, includes the cost of entertainers in your ticket. The cost of staging those concerts could be anywhere from $600,000 to a couple of $1 million. An important part of Formula One is corporate hospitality. You'll find a whole host of different offerings at the races around the world, but a lot of those facilities have to be built. They need to bring in kitchens, they need to erect tents, provide power, and ensure everyone has a great day. Those corporate facilities would come in at $3 to $7 million. Of course, every F1 event involves an F1 race. Some involve two, with a sprint race. And get this, the promoter has to pay extra for the sprint race. Let's say $600,000, because it gets more people through the door, and the crowds on the Friday and Saturday tend to be larger. F2 and F3, yeah, pay extra for that. And going back when the W Series was operating, there was a fee on top of your normal fee if you wanted the W Series racing in your neck of the woods. But the promoter does get a return from the Porsche Cup, because they actually pay to race at those events. Now you add up all of these costs, and it's not out of the question that a promoter might have to find anywhere from $70 to $150 million to run their 4-day sporting event. And then they have to hope and plan that things like COVID, political unrest, or rain doesn't ruin their event. I went to grandprix.com.au, which is the page for the Australian race, and I went down to page 36, and have a look at this. For 2024, the total revenue was 117 million Australian dollars. The total expenditure, 219. The Australian Grand Prix lost $100 million. So effectively, when you buy a ticket to that race, you're being subsidised by about 50%. So what's in it for a promoter to lose $100 million on an F1 race? Publicity, exposure. Melbourne's known as Australia's sporting capital, one of the great sporting cities in the world. F1, Australian Open tennis, Spring Racing Carnival, AFL Grand Final. The 100 million Australian dollars that the government puts in is seen as a valuable investment in promotion of the city. And remember too that a lot of the money being spent here is being spent locally. So staff are making wages, local businesses are getting these contracts. So it's good for the economy. So when people say tickets are expensive, yeah, but they could be a lot more expensive. And certainly you can pay up to $30,000 US for a ticket to F1 Garage with Gordon Ramsay this year. It's crazy, right? Who's going to pay that money? Well, they only need 120 people in a whole country or in the world to come and pay that money. And trust me, there are people who will gladly pay that for the exclusivity, for the access of being in pit lane, for great food, great drinks, and a fair bit of brag value. But on the other hand, if you're looking for a cheap race to attend, you're better off looking at a track that is permanent. So China, Hungary, Japan, great examples. You can get GA tickets there for a couple of $100s for 4 days. The most expensive races? Mexico City, Miami, and Las Vegas. And Mexico is the one that really surprises me because I would have thought cost of labour seems to be a lot cheaper in that country, and you would think that just your impression of Mexico would be that things would be cheaper. Absolutely not the case. And if you look at the price difference between, say, China, which is the cheapest race, and Las Vegas, Vegas is 8 times the price of China. Next time you're questioning the price you're paying to go and watch one of the world's great sporting events, just bear all these costs in mind. And remember, once again, quote Australia, I think it's 170 Aussie dollars for a general admission ticket on a Sunday. You were paying $250 to go and watch Taylor Swift. Now, Taylor's only on stage for a couple of hours. Australian Open, you're paying $600. Once again, it's a few hours instead of a whole day at a Grand Prix. I have no doubt you've learnt a thing or two from this video, and if you've liked it, could you please hit the like button? And for those unsubscribed, now is the time to hit that button. Thank you in advance. And for merchandise and a whole lot of extra content, flick around here. Thanks for watching, and stay passionate. This is a test of the audio, and it's too low.